away, David.
Thank you. So firstly, apologies if I'm looking down. I am presenting from my laptop. I will later switch to the actual machine. Secondly, this is a sort of unstructured talk, as all of my talks that I don't prepare are. I have a couple of things to show you about hot reload that I want to show you first, because I kind of love hot reload and I kind of also work on it. So it's kind of, I'm very biased. But after that, I've just got like a random list of stuff in VS that I think is cool. And some of it was in build and some of it wasn't. And so I'm happy to show you anything. But if you have any questions, just yell out. So let's talk about hot reload. Hot reload. So let's just run this game. This is trains. It's awesome. It's not a crucial part of the demo, but obviously it's very important to me. So hot reload is built on edit and continue, which maybe you've used, maybe you haven't. And edit and continue allows you to put a breakpoint somewhere and your program will stop. Excuse me. And you can edit the code, you can change the code and whatever. But it can be annoying to see what you're doing. Actually, a better example is if I maximize this again. If I edit the code now, let's say I want to change how a train is drawn in this example. Well, I can go over to this class here and I can make a change or whatever. But if I change it, like if I want to alt tab back to my game, I can't because it's stopped, it's not running. If there was some background processing that needs to happen, then it's not happening because I stopped it. So edit and continue is great, but there is a better way. So let me just go back to the side-by-side. So what hot reload is it's basically, you can think of it as edit and continue, but you don't have to stop your code. So I've just made an edit. Nothing's happened yet. What this is the black part. I don't know why I'm tracing this train around with my mouse, but it's the black part of the train. So it's currently 55, I think, wide. And I've just made it 20. And because this screen is now so small, you can't see this button. See this button? This button is fire because hot reload is lit. And so I'm just going to press this button. And what's going to happen? Now, that took a second, I will admit. But if you notice, the little black bar on the train is much smaller now. Let's change this one as well. Now, that took a second the first time I pressed it. That's just spinning up some stuff. Watch how quick this is. And go. Oh, I've changed the wrong thing. That train is a stub-nosed train now. Hang on, what do I, height, I want height. Ah, dear, hardest part of hot reload is remembering what to change. So I haven't actually saved this file, by the way. There we go, now we have skinny trains. So hot reload is just applying the changes as I make them, but it didn't stop the program, right? It didn't stop the game. And like for a game, that's kind of important because there's a whole bunch of state that this game has, like for example, what the tracks are and where they are. When I first was developing this game and trying to work out how things should look, I would have to stop the program. I'd change this to 55. I'd run the program. I'd draw some tracks. I'd put a train down. I'd try to remember, oh, wait, did that look better? That's probably a little bit worse. Hot reload just makes it really fast, which is cool. Tiny little trains. There is, however, a limitation here. Hot reload will happily change the code, but that sometimes isn't enough. So this class that I was changing before tells it how to draw trains. This class we're now looking at trains tells it how to draw tracks. And so you can see this num planks. This is how many planks in a track. So this is one piece of track and there's 3 planks. I'm sure that the official name for this is something better than planks, but anyway. I changed that to 5. I'm going to press the hot reload button and nothing happens. Why did nothing happen? Well, sleepers. Thank you, Ron. Yes. Well, the code in the game that says how many sleepers to draw has changed to 5. You just kind of have to trust me. The problem with this game in particular, or this scenario, is that hot reload doesn't know. It can't force this code to actually run. And I can demonstrate that by putting a breakpoint on. This breakpoint doesn't get hit, right? And that's because I have a bunch of caching, right? This is a game that is running at probably 60 frames a second, hopefully, if the code's right, or around about there. And so every track is cached. The shape of it is cached. So a horizontal track is drawn once and then it's cached. And then the whole track layout that I have in this game is also cached because tracks don't change much. So there's some limitations there for hot reload. However, we can work around them. So let me just make a slight change. Oh, hang on, I forgot to show you. So the other thing with hot reload is it's not just a VS feature. So in VS 16.11 preview 1, which is out now in preview, you will get the fire button. And in .NET 6 previews, you can also use .NET Watch. And so I can tell, whoops, project, source, trains, watch. So I can use .NET Watch to run this thing. And as you can see there, it says hot reload is enabled. So .NET Watch is now hot reload aware as well. This works slightly differently in that you have to, you have to save the file. So, hang on. So this says 5, but if you look, there's a little asterisk there. This isn't saved, right? So .NET Watch, you have to save the file for it to apply, but the same thing does work. Let me just prove that. I'm going over here and change. I'll tell you what, let's just undo all of this so it actually looks sensible. And if I save, .NET Watch notices. I obviously didn't change everything because those garages are still stubby, but that's okay. And actually, it should be in the logs here. Yeah, so it says here, file changed, train parameters, hot reload change succeeded. So this works from the command line as well, which means it works from VS Code as well. If I save this change to 5, you will see, again, it noticed, says track parameters changed, the hot reload change was applied successfully, but again, it's not changing. So how do we do that? How do we fix that problem? Well, what I can do is I can add this magical attribute called metadata update handler. So what's happening inside .NET when you do a hot reload or edit and continue is, so Roslyn is compiling the changes you make, and then it computes the diff between what was there before and what's there now. And then it essentially outputs, it's kind of like a DLL that is not the full DLL, it's just the DLL for that little change. And so the metadata in this case is the metadata of that DLL. And so that's what happens. In the runtime, it says, hey, I'm going to apply these metadata changes, which changes your code, and away we go. So what we can do is we can tell .NET, hey, when metadata is updated, please run my handler, which is this updater class, which is here. Now I've got 2 methods because at some point in .NET 6, between preview 4 and preview 6, they changed the name of the method you had to implement, and I couldn't be bothered trying to work out which one I needed, so I just did both. But so basically what happens is the runtime will call my clear cache method, either through here or here, and I am clearing various caches that are specific to this game. So if we just run that example again in .NET, how do we, I save that file, and then .NET, because we're still watching, yes. So now .NET Watch is going to run my thing again because I closed it because I'm a silly. All right, so now let's just make sure it's working by changing this to, let's change this one back to 10 because that was kind of funny. Yep, skinny train, so that works. But now if we change track parameters, oh, well, you can see it's already 5, but that's kind of cheating because it recompiled the whole thing. If I change this to 3, it changes. So hot reload can apply changes to anything, just about. The trick is sometimes you might have to change your app a little bit or add in one of these to convince your software to run that code again. So things like caching, etc., is an obvious example. So one of the things that .NET 6 now has is if you ever use reflection, all of those results that you get from reflection are cached inside .NET. So now when there's a hot reload, .NET will clear those reflection caches. Things like WinForms, so this is just a Windows desktop app. I'm actually not entirely sure whether, I think this is WPF, but it looks the same as WinForms because it's all custom drawn. But so WinForms will automatically repaint all of your forms for you when a hot reload happens. And, you know, on the web, obviously, there's a bunch of things that have to happen. So yeah, that's my hot reload demo. I'm going to get off my laptop unless someone has a question about that.
That's pretty cool, David. I do have a question. Sorry, it's just me asking heaps of questions.
Go for it.
What happens if it doesn't compile?
I can show you that. What do we got? We have a head height of 10. So that's the making the trains thin. So let's just break that, shall we? So that doesn't compile, but I want the rear height to be 20. So yeah, what should happen is it should just ignore the changes that don't compile. So this is not compiling. And if I change that to 20, we get a small train head. So it's just basically, it's compiling. There's this all sorts of diffing stuff inside Roslyn that's going, right, what's exactly changed? And it works out that this property has changed and this property has changed. Then it tries to compile them and goes, well, this property doesn't compile, but this one does. And goes, okay, fine, I'll just use that one.
That's some impressive compiler dark magic.
It's kind of fun. So it should be, I mean, there's still some changes that won't work. Like there's, the famous root edits. You still do get some of them. But one good thing about Hot Reload is that it's forcing lots of teams across Microsoft to sort of invest in this tech a bit. So the number of root edits is hopefully going down. I am currently working on adding attributes, because if you can't add attributes or modify attributes, then you can't change your routes in ASP.NET, for example. So the ASP.NET team is incentivized to help with that.
Is adding a property a root edit?
You're asking me like I know. Let's find out. 5 foot. That's right, isn't it? Yeah, seems okay. I think adding a property is fine. Adding a field should be fine. Whoops, that's a field.
What's happening there then? Like, if
changing a field to a property is probably not. I don't know. There is definitely areas where we can't. So so there you go. Changing a field to a property, no. So what this has had to do is introduce a backing field, which probably meant it's had to update the implicit constructor, and then that's the runtime's like, no, I don't know how to do that. There's all these sort of quirks of the runtime that end up being this sort of underlying issue. Lots to do with constructor initializers and how C# will generate you an empty constructor if you don't have one. But yeah, properties, like if you think about a property is really just a method, like to get property, get underscore whatever and a set underscore whatever. So they're just methods. Methods are pretty easy. Adding new methods is fine. Fields gets a bit funny. And what's the other one?
But it's like updated the existing instances to have some default state for those properties in the backing field that it's added, right?
So with the default instances, I'm not sure. With the fact that it let me add a field is presume. Well, I can tell you what. Let's try it properly, and I'll actually add a property this time, and I'll remember. I suspect this will work fine. I think it was the change from a field to a property. Yeah, so that's worked fine. So adding a property, which then is also adding a field and whatever, is fine. The other thing that can sometimes trip up Edit and Continue is some of this stuff can break or can not be allowed depending on where you're doing it. So if you have a breakpoint in the constructor, then adding a field then could be rude because that has to try and modify around where you are, kind of thing. But that's actually one of the best parts of Hot Reload is that all of that stuff gets to be ignored. There's sort of, I mean, there is still active statements, but it's not sort of user controlled and the rest of the thing isn't paused. So hopefully that sort of thing you won't see as much. I fixed that error already. Link expressions, there is support for link expressions to a certain degree. I don't know this, I can't remember the specifics. There is a page that lists all of the root edits if you look up the Hot Reload blog post, there's a link to it. I know you can change link expressions, the lambdas in them, because we have specific support for identifying those lambdas, but yeah, possibly not adding new ones. Adding lambdas and doing stuff with lambdas is another tricky one, and async methods because the compiler generates a helper class that has methods and properties and attributes and all sorts of things. So things like changing async to sync, etc., can be problematic. I have a random list of features in VS that I'm going to run through. The first thing I'm going to show you is a new feature called remove unused references. So in this game, when you restart the game, it serializes all of its state to disk, and then it deserializes it again. And I was going to use JSON for this because obviously, and I didn't end up doing that. So I now have a reference to Newtonsoft JSON that I don't think I need, but I'm not sure. So what I can do in VS, whoops, I probably did that too quick, is I can right click on a project and I can go remove unused references. And what this does is it uses data from the build to identify which packages, projects, DLLs, etc. are not used. And I can choose here, well, maybe say Newtonsoft, fine, I want to remove. There's more, I'll prove this to you in a sec. There is more than just one package. This isn't just listing every package and letting me choose remove. It has identified that this package is not used, I promise.
What happens if you dynamically load an assembly? Does it know that?
This is a great question, Barbara. It doesn't know that. So if you use reflection to dynamically load an assembly or something, or dig into a type, then the build is not going to know that you use that because you only use that at runtime. But that's why you can say keep. And so what this will do if I hit OK. So this, if I go into here, I'll just prove to you I have other packages. This will have removed Newtonsoft. And what you can see is to this project reference where I said I want to keep this, it's added this treat as used, which basically tells it, so next time I run this, it should now say, you know, that's all good. This you want to keep, it's fine. And so you have to manually do that because it can't know what you do at runtime, but it does give you that facility, so it won't bother you again next time. You won't accidentally remove it. So that's remove unused references. I'm going to turn on an option and here called Inline Hints, and I'm just going to turn them all on. And what this does is it adds all these little things to your file, or to your view of your file, at least. They're not actually in the file. So what this does is this tells me parameter names. This also tells me types if I use var. So this is saying it's a string. Oops, can't use var on an array. See, if you didn't know that, you learned something. You're welcome. Yeah, so types on var, etc. I personally don't have this turned on, but one of my favorite things, if I turn them back off again, is this magical display all hints while pressing Alt F1. This is really good when you're reading code that you're not familiar with, because you come into a method like this and maybe you don't know what this is. You just hold down Alt F1 and it displays. And then when you let go, it goes away again. And I think that's awesome. I think the Alt F1 is actually the killer feature here. I don't actually like the other bit. So the other thing we can do with this, I'm just going to copy this line of code. Manager.release. I can press tab and tab again, and Visual Studio is now helping me call this method. But it's not really giving me that much help. I mean, I can tab between these two parameters, it's fine, but zeros is not very exciting. But if I introduce variables that have the right name, so I should probably cast them as lines. So pretend you're in a scenario where you actually have variables that are well named, because you would, because your code would be real. If I now do this, so point of release, I press tab, tab again, and now it's going to help me fill in these parameters, but it's also going to look in the current context and say, well, hang on, is there anything that makes sense here? And this works really well when you have multiple overloads of things. So you can page through the overloads like you normally do with up and down, but as it's changing those parameters you see, it's re-inferring all the time based on what's around it. So if a new overload introduces a new parameter name that you've got a variable for, it'll use that. If I were to change this to, 1, 2, 3 and move to another overload, if that other overload had an X parameter, it would keep the 1, 2, 3 that I typed in because I sort of overrode its decisions. This one is also, you have to turn it on. It is, I think, in Intellisense. It is tab twice to insert arguments. It is experimental.
How tight's the string?
Amazing.
So,
is that exact match of string, or will it look for like subsections of strings to work out what variables to put in there?
don't know. I imagine it's doing the same sort of search as Intellisense does, so it probably supports like camel case matching. There's some fuzziness, but yeah.
Okay, so can you tell us what the item right above that in the options is, which is show items from unimported namespaces?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's also like, it's not turned on by default, but I can see it there and I'm like, ooh.
Yeah, so that one's not turned on by default just because it could potentially be a performance issue depending on how much stuff you have referenced. But that one, what's a good example? See, now you put me on the spot here.
Sorry, I didn't have to do that. I could cycle back.
No,
and
you
work
should
it out
totally do
myself.
this. Here we go. Here's a good example. So I know this project references WPF, but obviously it's not. I don't have a using for it. But so I want a message box. I can just find message box, and when I press enter, it will add the using at the top. That's all that is.
Oh, so as opposed to having to bring up the quick actions and say, oh yes, I want to pull that one in.
Yes. Or if
cool,
you're not
thanks.
sure what it's called, like everything, like the entire world is in this list now.
Oh,
The entire .NET framework is in this list, which is why it's potentially a performance issue, right? If you have 1,000 packages referenced from NuGet, they're all going to be in this list, which is great, depending on your point of view and your performance of your box.
cool. Thanks for that little side box. That was good.
That's okay. I think it's probably in my list. Let's talk about project properties. Let's get off code for a bit. I'm going to right click on this project and go to properties. And you might not recognize what comes up. So this is our new project properties box. And it is one very long list of properties that you can jump to around here. But most importantly, it has a search. So if I want to change the framework, then I can just search for it. I don't need to remember where that is. That one you can enable in environment and preview features. It is this one, enable updated project properties UI. So everything I'm showing you at the moment is all out there already. I'll tell you about the three features that you can't get yet.
So currently there are lots of properties that projects can have that there is no UI for. Is this what we would be giving the UI for, that like language, for example, or deterministic? Things like those.
Deterministic is there. So one of the reasons that we did this internally is that updating the old property pages is about 2 days of work for one property. It's kind of crazy, and across 2 different code bases in 2 different programming languages. It's kind of silly. This new system has been designed to make that easier to add new properties. So yes, part of the goal is that we can now expose more, much more quickly. I don't know exactly whether its current state has everything or has more or has less than what was there before, but certainly it's only going to get better because it's so much easier than it used to be.
And conditional compilation. You can previously could only do with hand editing the project file.
Yeah, some of that is easier now. Some of it you could do. There was 2 drop downs at the top of the project properties screen. One thing that this does that's great, as you can see here, is it shows you what the values actually will be for each condition. But you can, whoops, I've just pressed the help box and it's opened up the browser on the other screen. You can, here, I'm not sure if there's supposed to be some UI there for that, but you can configure this. I can have unsafe only in debug or only in release. I said release, or you can say not. So you can definitely work with that a little bit easier than the 2 drop downs at the top that was always a bit confusing in the old system. And hopefully just in general, things make more sense, like nicer things in dropdowns. While we're on new UI, I also have an editor config file here, which I can double click, and ta-da! We also have a new UI for editor configs. So I know there's an extension for doing Intellisense, but if you didn't have that installed, you pretty much just have to look up the help. So this obviously is a lot easier. You just tick boxes and read what is supposed to happen and adjust things. And then you can change code style, and you can do all of this stuff, and you can change analyzers. And so this is for configuring all of your, suppressions and things, and all of your warnings. This is all of the analyzers that I have referenced, obviously, in this project, but does it save without file open? I don't think that's been changed. That's a long-standing project system bug, I'm pretty sure.
I have a question. What happens when these things are company-wide fixed, because of coding style or so? Can you configure that, load from a file that is shared or something like that?
Yeah, so editor config supports that. So that is one of the goals of editor config. So the idea is you check this into your Git repo, you have it at the, you probably have it at the root of your repository, and then it affects every project under there, so that you can distribute this. That's the idea, is that it is the way of transcribing your settings, or the settings that you want Visual Studio to have, but putting that as part of the repository so that everyone has to get them. They can't, if my Visual Studio was set to use spaces, not tabs, or tabs, not spaces, this file would override it. Which you can actually see sometimes when you open up a C# file. It even says down the bottom, it says user preferences overridden by editor config. Don't know if you can see that. It's pretty small writing, but yeah, so that's definitely part of the goal. While we're here, let's talk about these little icons. And I might even zoom in. Oh, these are pixelated icons. That has been fixed, I promise. Oh, there you go then. Are they less pixelated now? That might be me. So this is another optional feature, which is under, where's this one? Text editor. I want to say this is under advanced. Yes, inheritance margin. So this is the inheritance margin. So what this does is this, so this line here is code lens, right? And I actually usually now have this off because we have inheritance margin. This is saying, hey, there's 26 references to current trade. That's great. That's a lot to sort of sift through. What this one does is this just says, yeah, here's everything that implements it. So it's looking down. This is an interface. So it's looking down through everything that implements this interface, and I can jump straight to the implementation. If I'm at the implementation, I can jump back up to the top. If I was smarter, I would think about a better example for this. So let's go with set angle. No, that's a bad idea. Entity, this will be better. So column, yeah, let's go to track.column. Here we go. See this little double arrow? So this class, this implements iStatic entity.identifier, but also there are 3 classes that inherit from this class, and so they override identifier. So it's kind of like find all refs. It's kind of like code lens. It's the same, sort of thing. It's just specific to your inheritance hierarchy or your interfaces.
And much quicker.
Much quicker, and much quicker for jumping around your code where you want to go, rather than everywhere that identifier is used. So yeah, I actually have code lens turned off now. I don't know why it's not synced to this version, probably because I just repaired it 5 seconds ago. But yeah, so that's the inheritance margin. That's also awesome. That one is also experimental, which just means there might be bugs, but probably going to be here to stay. Intellisense. So this switch is operating on an enum, and if I do this, I now get all of the values from that enum in my Intellisense list, which is cool. So it's especially cool because I can just type in left and I don't have to worry about typing the full name. This is also works for static methods, which means, let me find a good spot to do this. My favorite one of these is I can go string s equals empty, and it knows that there's a static method that returns the right type, and the way, or that's on the type that returns the right type, and it just goes. This is super easy if you use immutable arrays and immutable dictionaries, especially. They all have an empty property, and it's super hard to get to. And now you just type in empty. The keen eyed amongst you will notice something else on my screen, which is new, which is this fixed formatting thing. And I can make another one appear here in red, which is bracket expected. So this is one of the ones that is not available anywhere else yet. It actually hasn't even been a PR that's opened on the Roslyn repo. I pulled down someone's personal branch because I wanted to show it off because it's so cool. But it's just inline errors. It's basically showing you what is in the error list. Obviously for this file, there's two things, and here they are. And it just brings them front and center. It's pretty simple, but it's amazing once you start to use it. Of like, how did you ever live without this? Interestingly, Xcode has this feature. It's probably the only thing good about Xcode. So speaking of features that don't exist yet, is track value source. So what this one does, this is another sort of take on the find references style thing, but this lets you dig in to where things come from. So in this case, I said, hey, where does this .row come from? And so this is showing me everywhere that the row property is set. Excuse me. Now this is an I entity, which means it's a train and a track. So that gets a little bit confusing. So if I click through here, you'll see, well, it could be set here in the row property, but this is the add train method. So I know this one's not relevant, but maybe this one might be. Oh, apply step. That's an interesting method. Okay. What about this one? Here we go. We're deserializing something. Okay, cool. And you can dig into these as well. So here we are. We're storing a new track, let's say. Well, where does this get called? And so we dig in here and we can say, oh, okay, this is everywhere that store entity is used. Depending on your code base, some of these trees get extremely long. Some of them get recursive. But so this lets you dig in essentially. Oh, this is this has found lots of tests that all just add lots of tracks to the database. But so, here we go. This value is 5. So this is digging through the path through the code, setting variables. If they come from parameters, it'll come from where that method's called. If they come from method returns, it'll track where that's called, etc., etc. This one in the errors is going to be coming soon to some unknown version of Visual Studio, because these are still definitely in development. Particularly this value source, there's lots more work to do on the UI. Like if I click on that, you can't even read that row. All that work is still to come. Obviously, the hard part of actually getting the data right is what's worked on first.
Dave, just so you got there, is that specifically an OO thing for like OO properties? As in, you could just go inside a function and say, track this, and it tells you the call stack that it's filtered through. Yeah, no, it's definitely not just for so it works on parameters as well. And I actually think parameters is where it really works better, because you can see where this angle property came from, where parameter came from. It works for everything. Works for all L values essentially. So the other thing that's not out yet, but this one at least is checked into main, is see how angle here is underlined? This is an option under Intellisense, I'm guessing. Nope. Advanced, maybe. Nope. Nope. There it is. Underline reassigned variables. So what this does, this is an interesting one that at first you might think, why do I need this, or why would I want this? But it depends on your code base. Essentially, in C#, you can specify a field being read-only. You can specify a property being read-only. You can't specify a local variable being read-only, or a parameter, in fact. So what this does is this just highlights any local variable you have, or local thing that is ever written to. And if it is, it underlines it.
So in this case, it's pretty obvious. This method is deliberately modifying angle all the time. So it's underlined, no big deal. But if we come down here, something like this, this maybe stands out as like, hang on, is that weird? Like I'm passing in this value, but I'm also reassigning it. And, this might be a red flag for readability. It might be a red flag for a bug. Don't know. If your code base is one where you generally don't do this style, then the underlining is really powerful. If you're the type of coder or the type of code base where this is done all the time, then obviously this one you probably want to leave off. But that's interesting. Can we enforce the underline as an error? No, that would be interesting. Hopefully, eventually, you can change the color. It's actually there's a bug, or not a bug. There's a feature request on the fonts and colors dialog to add underline as an option. But in theory, once underline is an option there, you'd be able to make them red and bold, so they'd look like errors. Maybe I should not have clicked on. Yeah, see here you can change. Yes, there's no current error. But I mean, eventually, if C# gets read-only locals, then sure. Intellisense. Yay, Intellisense. Double. This is a double. I would like to make it an int. I'm going to call it I. Oh, wait a minute, I wanted to make it an int. Now I've got to go back. I've got to add brackets for int. I've got to put brackets around the whole thing so I can IntelliSense off that. Or I could not anymore, because down the bottom of IntelliSense now is all of the casts you can do. And I can just do that. And then I can keep dotting, and away we go. And I can type in double, presumably. I can type in uint, and then I can type in int, and then I can type in uint again. And I think you know where this is going. So yes, so casts now show up in IntelliSense. I believe, actually, I'm not sure. I didn't see them. No, okay. Operators is coming soon as well. So you'd be able to see whether this, I mean, obviously it's a double, but if you had a custom type that implemented a plus operator or a minus operator, whatever, you'd be able to see that as well. And again, you'd be able to, complete it, and it would change all the code as necessary. Smart break line. Okay, I'm going to see if I can do this. I don't use this one. So if current angle is greater than, oops, see, I'm too bad. So I'm going to press Shift Enter, and it has inserted braces. This is smart break line. What's smart about it is that if I didn't want to do that, I can press Shift Enter again. Well, no, I can't. Hang on. Shift Enter? No. There's a way to make it take them away as well. So this works on, anything that has a block. But there's a few things like that. So that's called smart break line. The plan is for more things to come to that. So Shift Enter as a way to say, essentially say, I'm finished writing this now, do something, which, usually we use Enter to say, I've finished this, and all it does is put a new line in. So Shift Enter is a way to say, do something smarter if you know something smarter. At the moment, it's just for braces.
Jonathan wants to know if you have any love for Visual Studio for Mac. I'm just the messenger.
I personally.
A question was asked from a Mac as well.
Here is my M1 Mac that I use to develop, or to specifically put Roslyn into VS Mac. That is my job. So I do have some love for them, but I don't work on the team, so I don't have a lot of influence. Let's see. The things that I've shown that won't work on VS for Mac, essentially everything that's, sort of the UI bits, like the, the inline errors, the inheritance margin, etc. Those bits won't come to VS for Mac automatically, but all the IntelliSense stuff does come to VS for Mac. We share the same sort of underlying code base in that respect. Smart break line, possibly not. Tab completion, no. But yeah, so there's definitely overlap. The VS for Mac actually, if you've got VS for Mac, you can turn on the preview. The light bulb experience, this thing in VS for Mac, is actually better than the one in Windows, if you ask me. There's a preview feature you can enable in VS for Mac for a new light bulb experience, and it's really good. What's new? Oh, introduce parameter. Okay, that's new. I'm going to see if I can. Half the problem with these is coming up with a good place to demo them. And this is where my do as little work as possible sort of mantra really falls down. So, okay, so this method takes in a parameter called data, and then inside the method, we're splitting it up with a pipe. So if I control dot here, I can introduce a parameter for data.split. And boy, is that going to change a lot of code. This is maybe a terrible example. Nope. Okay, so I think this is not a good example. What this is sometimes does, or is supposed to do, lines. Okay. Let's see if we can try a simpler example. So what this should do is offer to make, no, okay. I'm going to guess that this is buggy. I don't know if this one's released yet either. What this should do is basically find everywhere that deserialize is called, and either, depending on which option I picked, update it to also pass in this lines.length as a parameter, which it would then have index here, or it would add an overload to sort of do that work. Oops, yeah. So yeah, that's it. It's sort of like, promote this code to a parameter kind of thing. That one I'm guessing is still in development. Does anyone like source generators? I do, so bad luck. So what's new for source generators, and actually for analyzers as well, is I can now choose. So normally this launch thing has project executable, and I don't know what snapshot debugger is, that's an Azure thing. I can now choose Roslyn component. And then when I choose Roslyn component, this is going to go through and find all of the projects in this solution that use this source generator or analyzer, pick trains. The way to sort of light this up is, it's actually not that. It's changed to is Roslyn. So if you add that to your project, then that will add this to the dropdown, which means you can select it. And so then now I can set this as a startup project. And in my source generator, I can put a breakpoint and I can hit F5. Oh, but I forgot the debugger doesn't work in this build of VS, so this won't work. But what this would do is it actually starts the compiler under the debugger. And so you can just step through your source generator as normal. It works amazingly. Oh, it actually ran. Okay, that's surprising, but there you go. Maybe this is going to work. Cool. So this is running, like you can see, this says csc.exe. Hopefully you can see it. Maybe it's too small. This is just compiling that project I said to compile. And so as part of compiling that, it's going to load my source generator. And here we go. I am debugging through my source generator, which is probably unimpressive if you've never done source generators. But if you have, you've fallen off your seat now, and I apologize. What else with source? Actually, with source generators, the other thing we can do with source generators is source generators should also show up. I'm wondering what to search for. One. There it is. Nope. So source generators should also show up in here. There it is. Oops. Yeah, so this is the results of my source generator. And as you can see, this is all colored nicely. Ignore the ugliness of the code. That's my own fault because that's what I'm generating. But the fact that this shows up in go to all, and I can, find all refs, and I can go to definition, etc. This is all just normal code. That one is another option, which we can turn on. I think this one's under advanced. If it's not in advanced, it's under Intellisense. Yeah, enable all features in open files from source generators. Experimental. This is a long long one, but yeah, if you use source areas, that one's a good one to turn on. Finding files has a new thing. I'm just going to find something. Finding files has a keep results button, which is awesome, and repeat find as well. I use these two all the time. So you used to have to choose, window 1 or window 2. Now you just press keep, and that one will stay there, and the other ones won't. This repeat is, well, hopefully that'll get down to 1 click in future. Yeah, there's also these options here. So you can say to append the results as well, which is weird.
Yeah, which again isn't set by default. It doesn't remember it, does it? So that would be cool.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think by default it's still, I think there's a lot of muscle memory in Control F type enter.
Oh, there totally is.
They don't want to break that.
Like you say, search again, I'm like, it's a second to do the keyboard. So
yes. Let's see what else. Okay, there's one more which, and I have no idea if this is going to work, but we're going to try it here. Let's see. Nope, I might not have it turned on. And no, I haven't turned on. I was hoping to show you something in IntelliCode, but IntelliCode is run by AI, and so unfortunately sometimes the AI just, I don't know, goes to sleep. It's whole line completion. Maybe if I forcibly enable it, the reactive variant. I don't know what that is. Let's see what happens. It's not doing it. This one, it could also be this code base, because when you're working within calling your own code, it has sort of less knowledge. But when I'm doing my day-to-day work, the IntelliCode whole line completion, I don't know if you've used IntelliCode much, but I remember when IntelliCode first came out and I was just amazed by the things that it got right. And now I'm used to it, so no big deal. But whole line completion is back to that, oh my God, how did it know what I wanted to do thing? Yeah, it's not working. Okay. Okay, I seriously have not tried this, but I think, oh God, what happened there? I think, can I do that on this build? Ooh, I can. So this is a C# 10 feature. I don't know if we want to talk about C# as well as Visual Studio. Let's see, what project am I in? I'm in this one. So these ones now, ooh, nope, it's not even there. So these should now gray out. Yes. So this is now unnecessary. I don't need using system in my file because I have a file that has global usings. So that means for the entire project, this has all of the usings. What else can I do in C# 10? You know what I hate? I hate indentation. So I can put a semicolon there, get rid of that. And now my whole file is indented one thing less. So that namespace just applies for the rest of the file.
you just did multi-line cursor.
I did.
Have they fixed, or are they fixing, or you fixing the fact that if you use your keyboard shortcuts to do multi-lines, as soon as you try to control right across, more like if you're at the start of the line on the private, if you try to control, and go right arrow to go to the next word, it loses the multi-line cursor. It only works if you've used your mouse to do your multi-lines. Yeah,
so I don't believe they have.
Yeah,
but yes and no.
You just did it there.
Yeah. So what you're seeing, what is frustrating you, frustrates me all the time. When you use Alt Shift to create a box selection, that's not multi-cursor. That's a box selection, which is different, which is very annoying. So what I do is use Alt Shift dot, which selects the next instance of that word.
Yeah,
this is now multi-cursor, and so now I can do everything I expect to do.
It just doesn't work if it's different words at the start. But usually in here,
box selection doesn't have multi-cursor. Yeah, I've complained about that so many times, and
I just jump into Visual Studio Code so often. I copy across the Visual Studio Code, do what I need to do, and then bring it back.
That's the other way to do it. Minimal APIs. I I don't do much web stuff anymore, but yeah, minimal APIs. I'll work something out. Let's see. Minimal APIs. So what minimal APIs is, well, there's two sides to it. One is the web side and one is the C# side. This is a bad example. This is a good example. So if you didn't know in C#, you can now just do this. Oh, I need those using comments. But so yeah, if in your program.cs, you don't need the main method anymore, and you don't need the.
Sorry, Dave, that's not gonna work because for desktop you need to have a STI thread affinity, and we actually are talking with the Taub and Fowler about this. It won't be coming in .NET 6, I don't expect, but maybe in .NET 7.
Yeah.
And there is another design proposal which obviously simplifies this method at some point.
Yes. Yeah. So that's my yeah. So I don't have any web stuff, but so minimal APIs is the combination of the fact that you don't need a main method anymore, and then also some nicer APIs for ASP.NET that just let you spin up a very minimal website or web API or something with very brief code, terse code. It doesn't really sort of change. It's not a fundamental difference. It's not changing sort of the technology. It's just exposing some of the right helper methods and interfaces and things like that, so you can get minimal code. Alt-Shift, someone had a question about Alt-Shift-Dot, so I'm just going to talk about that for a bit. So what Alt-Shift-Dot is, I can't see my menus anymore. So under Edit, which would be that one, there is multiple carets. So Shift-Alt-Dot and Shift-Alt, Shift-Alt comma, I don't know why that's not there. The way that I think about it is it's Shift-Alt and open and close angle brackets. What they do is they go and find the next instance of that word that you've got selected in the file, and it puts a cursor there. So I can select everything that says names, and I can just type whatever I want. That's not necessarily useful. So for example, this name here is part of another word. I don't want that one. So then I can press Shift. I'll basically keep holding down Shift and Alt, and I can press the question mark button, and it skips that one. And I'll skip that one as well, and skip that one, and skip that one. This one I want, this one I want, this one I want. And now I can type in name, and they all update. So I've essentially, you can also just rename a variable. Sometimes that works. But yeah, I use the multiple cursors all the time because it's fantastic. So dot goes forwards, comma goes backwards. You can press Shift Alt semicolon, and it selects them all in the file. It's really cool. Yes, fancy find and replace, exactly. Speaking of which, Shift next, find next selected is also cool. Control F3, and then you just basically brings up find with whatever's under your cursor, and then you can just keep finding through the file. I use that one a lot.